How do you plan to navigate that, given that you are such an unpleasant person, Mylene?
It's going to be really challenging for me, I think.
How do you plan to treat clients when you are just mean?
I'm Mylene.
And I'm Michael, and we're on the grad school journey to becoming licensed therapists.
Come with us to class as we discuss and dissect all we can learn about mental health, relationships, therapy techniques, and everything in between.
With your two favorite therapists in training, this is Therapy in Progress.
Hey, Michael.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Happy episode 2.
Happy episode 2.
We're back. Episode 1 was really fun.
It was.
I think this is gonna be great.
Yeah. And it's not going to take us 3 takes this time.
Hey, shh. Episode 1 did not take us 3 takes. It was one fluid conversation with no editing whatsoever.
No, we didn't need any help with that. We didn't have to phone a friend. Nothing.
We had sound issues. It's a learning curve, though. That's what makes it fun, right?
Yeah.
For those of you just joining us, I'm Michael.
And I'm Mylene.
And what are we doing here?
Today, we are bringing you into the classroom with us on our journey to becoming licensed therapists.
Yes, this is Therapy in Progress, and you're learning as we learn, and we're having a great time.
Yeah.
What are we going to be talking about today?
Today, we're talking about the different types of therapy and how to find the right therapist for you.
Yes, because there are so many different styles out there.
Yeah.
At the end of our first episode, we mentioned that we would talk about attachment styles. We realized for episode 2, maybe take a little bit of a broader approach. Episode 3 will be attachment styles. Mm-hmm. We will get more into that. But we wanted to start with a very general look through. These are all the different styles. We call them modalities or orientations of therapy that are available.
Yeah. And this will give you more context into what we talk about later when we're talking about all the different styles and different techniques that therapists use in the therapy room.
Yeah, because I think some people think that therapy is therapy, but it's not true. There are styles that focus on different things, that have different philosophies. Some are very past-focused, some are very forward-focused.
Right.
Yeah. Before we get into all that, how was class this week?
It was good.
Yeah?
Yeah, I gave a couple presentations. They went well.
Nice.
What about you?
I learned some really cool things this week.
Tell me about them.
One thing that's just a tiny little interesting thing that I thought was really cool. I didn't realize, we always say signs and symptoms of a disorder, right? Signs and symptoms. Mm-hmm. There's a difference between a sign and a symptom. I didn't know that.
I didn't know this either.
So a sign is something outward that can be observed, either by a clinician, by a family member, or a friend. Mm-hmm. A symptom is something internal that the client or the patient reports experiencing.
Oh.
So they're very important distinctions when you're classifying things for a diagnosis. Mm-hmm. A sign is something like, I haven't showered in multiple days and my personal hygiene is suffering. Whereas a symptom is self-reporting. I've felt really down for the last week, 2 weeks, month.
Oh, I see. Mm-hmm. So something that you can see on the outside would be a sign, and then something that someone's experiencing on the inside, that's a symptom.
Right. And both are equally valuable for diagnoses and for explaining where you're at.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially when we're taking into consideration the mental status evaluation that therapists will conduct when looking at diagnoses. For those of us who don't know, when you see a therapist, they may conduct this evaluation just to see what are the signs and symptoms. And there's a difference between mood and affect. Mm-hmm. Mood is what the client is reporting they're feeling, whereas affect is what the therapist is seeing.
Nice. We also had a really fascinating conversation about avoidance, which was really cool. My professor was talking a lot about how avoidance is a very sneaky thing.
Yes.
Because it starts as this really useful defense mechanism almost. It's a survival instinct, right? Mm-hmm. You're trying to keep yourself safe.
Yeah.
But then we start relying on it. It starts becoming a pattern. Mm-hmm. And if it becomes too pervasive, you're avoiding, it can really inhibit your personal life, your professional life, your social life, right? But she had a really positive spin at it. She said, you're not trying to eliminate your survival instincts, which I thought was such a cool way to phrase it. You're not trying to crush the part of you that's trying to protect yourself, but you're trying to notice when you avoid certain topics from conversations or situations, and is that starting to make your life smaller because it's become a crutch, it's become a reflex.
So it's how much it's impacting your day-to-day.
Yeah. She says flexibility. Oh, it was fascinating. She said her definition of mental health, good mental health, is flexibility in thoughts and feelings and behavior.
Flexibility.
Yes.
That is an excellent definition.
It's not about things being good all the time. Because that doesn't exist.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It's all about adaptability. So being able to handle the ebbs and flows of life, whether it be the highs where you're super happy and joyful, or maybe the lows when things are a little bit harder, you're feeling a little bit down and sad.
Yeah. And being able to have that flexibility within yourself, the way you either relate to people or the way you think about things, to not be stuck in a rigid way of dealing with your thoughts and emotions, but being able to kind of step outside yourself and be like, okay, let me be flexible here. Let me find a different way of looking at this or a different way to feel about this. Yeah, I thought that was a great conversation.
That sounds like an amazing conversation. And it reminds me of attachment styles. Maybe avoidant attachment.
Look at that tie-in.
Very
good. Which we will be talking about
next week.
Episode 3, attachment styles. But for now, you want to dive in?
Let's dive in.
Where do you want to start?
Let's dive into the different approaches and methodologies.
Yes, and before we do, we just want to be really clear that there are dozens and dozens of different therapy approaches out there. We're just hitting some of the biggest ones, some of the ones that you might see the most often, but there's other ones we won't necessarily mention here, like
Gestalt,
expressive arts therapy. Also, we're going to talk kind of in the lens of individual therapy, but there's also couples counseling, which we will talk a lot about. There's family systems. There's a whole bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking mainly individual therapy.
Yeah. This is by no means comprehensive or holistic of all the approaches that are out there, but these are just some of the ones that you might encounter when you're doing your own research on where to find your own therapist.
Let's do it.
So let's start with some of the more past-focused.
These are also some of the earlier forms of therapy to be developed. This is coming from Freud. This is coming from Alfred Adler. Yes. So these are some of those early psychologists who were kind of foundational. Love them or hate them now. I know a lot of people have different feelings specifically on Freud. Yeah. Let's start with the psychoanalysis / psychodynamic. What is that looking like?
Yeah, so psychoanalysis and psychodynamic, they're both based on Freud. So specifically, psychoanalysis really dives into the subconscious and making the subconscious conscious. So what does that mean?
That is digging back into your formative childhood experiences to kind of be able to bring to the surface what made you who you are and some of the things that might be causing dysfunction now. If we understand where they're coming from and we're able to bring them to light and analyze them and unpack them and maybe work on them, that can fix present functioning.
Yes.
That's part of the philosophy.
Yes. And then with psychoanalysis, we also are looking at the stages of development that Freud coined. So people may be familiar with being stuck on certain phases, such as like anal retention or
oral fixation. Yeah. Freud also gets into the Oedipus complex and the id and the ego and the superego. A lot of those maybe stereotypical psychological terms you hear, those have a real basis in Freudian psychology.
Yeah. And which is not to say much of this has also been debunked in more recent years.
Yes.
However, the fundamentals of it, really diving into the past, seeing how that's affecting you today, the conscious versus the subconscious, that's still relevant.
Absolutely. I think Freud's biggest contribution was he was really the first one academically to say, hey, there's this thing called the subconscious, which is this huge portion of the way our minds function that we're actually not actively aware of.
Yes.
That's huge, and that is true.
And having us gain access to it through talk therapy, hugely important for mental wellness and the evolution of psychology.
Absolutely. We will acknowledge that there are many other things about Freudian psychology that the field has moved away from because there's a lot more scientifically backed approaches now.
Yes.
He was a little bit problematic when it came to women and other things. So we are putting that out there as a disclaimer. Psychodynamic therapy. So that was psychoanalytic therapy, psychoanalysis. Psychodynamic therapy is very similar. It's kind of the more modern sibling of psychoanalysis. So they share a lot of the same things, a few differences. Psychodynamic therapy, it's a little briefer in terms of time length and frequency. You know, true psychoanalysis, you're doing 5 times a week, right? That's not true with psychodynamic therapy. Also, it pays a lot more attention to your social context and the external environment, whereas psychoanalysis is very inwardly focused. And the last thing about psychodynamic is that it focuses a little less on that client-therapist relationship, because with psychoanalysis, there's a lot about transference. What's transference?
Transference is when the client is projecting their own experiences onto the therapist.
Yeah, like as an individual.
As an individual.
Yeah, yeah. So psychoanalysis deals a lot with that. Psychodynamic less so. Yeah.
There's also this idea of countertransference, which is the opposite, where the therapist is actually projecting onto the client. And that's something that a therapist needs to be aware of as well, so that it doesn't affect the way that they conduct therapy. Also, it can be informative of maybe some things that the therapist is noticing, and vice versa.
I will say, quick side note, every therapist under the sun experiences countertransference.
Yes.
Because we're human beings, and you're going to have your own personal experiences as a clinician that sometimes bubble up in the therapy room. The trick is being aware of it and knowing how to stop it from influencing the care.
Awareness is the biggest thing.
Yeah, because then you can navigate it.
Yeah, exactly. Now we can talk a little bit about Adlerian. So Alfred Adler. So this is more goal-oriented. So you have a goal in mind for what you want to achieve out of therapy instead of just kind of broadly talking about your different life experiences. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Alfred Adler was a colleague of Freud, but then ended up branching off doing his own thing because they started disagreeing. Apparently, it was Freud's way or the highway.
They had a lot of drama. There was tea to be spilled.
Drama in the therapy room. Yeah, so it is goal-oriented, both a goal for therapy and also like a life goal. And not goals as in like, I want to be a doctor, but more these subconscious goals, like what is bringing you into therapy goal-wise subconsciously? Is it a long for connection? Is it a long for a longing for recognition? For are you feeling inferior? He dealt a lot with inferiority versus superiority. So it's about unpacking what is driving what's missing and how can you work toward it.
Yeah, and with that, kind of finding your place and your meaning in society, being able to navigate where do you fit in, where do you belong?
Yeah, he was big on social interest, which is looking at a world bigger than you.
Yes.
And where do you fit in into the societal landscape?
Yeah.
People like Adlerian therapy because it shares a lot of, again, he was an early colleague of Freud, so it shares some of that Freudian stuff, but with a more contemporary spin, maybe?
Yeah. And taking into consideration the way that the external can influence the individual is hugely important and was very, very important for how we look at psychology today.
Yeah, absolutely. I also want to say, you could spend a lifetime studying any single one of these therapeutic modalities. So bear in mind, everyone, we are giving you a very useful but brief overview.
Yeah.
So just know that there are books and books and books written on any one of these.
Yeah. This could, to people who are more familiar, this could seem a little bit reductive in nature, but this is just your high-level overview of what these different modalities look like.
Absolutely. Good disclaimer. Should we move on to one of my personal favorites?
Please.
What's our next section? What is this next umbrella that we're moving into?
So this is going to be more humanistic. Approaches. Yeah. So this is more human-centered approaches.
Yes. Speaking of which, person-centered therapy is something you might hear. I love person-centered therapy.
Yes.
What does that look like?
Person-centered therapy, created by Carl Rogers. Love him. It stops being so much about the therapist's interpretation and starts being more about what the individual is experiencing and how they can navigate their own issues. So instead of a therapist being the authority, it's more of a collaborative approach where we're finding out what works for you as an individual, not the therapist putting their perceptions onto you.
So it's less psychoeducational and it's more of a collaboration. The therapist is more of a guide, maybe.
Yeah.
More of a facilitator.
Exactly.
I really like person-centered therapy because the refrain you might hear a person-centered therapist say is, I can't give you an answer, but I'm here to help you find your own answer.
Right.
It's all about having the client be in the driver's seat.
Yes.
Which I think is really cool.
Because at the end of the day, the client is who is the expert on their own life. They should be the one to make the decision about the next steps that they take to achieve that life that they want.
So a person-centered therapist is going to be very validating, very compassionate, as all therapists should be, but particularly important is this term that Carl Rogers popularized, which is unconditional positive regard.
Yes.
Talk to me about unconditional positive regard.
Yeah. So the therapist is always going to be your cheerleader, essentially. They're going to always hold you in a positive light. So they're always going to see the best in you. And they're going to try to empower you to see yourself in that same way.
Yeah. The idea of unconditional positive regard, I think, is so interesting because just listening to the definition, you would think, oh, that's something that every therapist needs to have.
Yeah.
In a way, yes. But also, in a way, it's kind of the extreme end of compassion and understanding. We had a conversation in my first semester in class. Are there any types of people per se that you would feel uncomfortable treating as a therapist. Meaning if somebody who was openly racist came into your office and needed treatment, if somebody who had a history of certain kinds of crimes came into your office, would you feel comfortable treating them? A truly unconditional positive regard therapist would be able to put personal feelings aside and say, no matter what the background is, I'm here to make that person the center and help them achieve their goals. That's not for everyone.
No, it's not.
From a clinician point of view. Is that something that you see in yourself? I'm curious.
So this is really challenging for me because I see it in maybe a different way where I am here to serve that client in whatever capacity I possibly can. There are certain demographics that I wonder how effective I would be at treating just because of my personal biases. Like maybe I'm not the right therapist for them and I should refer them to somebody who's more competent and more able to help them and see them in an unbiased light.
That's so great. I want to make that distinction really clear. It's not that any one person is not deserving of treatment, because every human being, no matter what, is deserving of treatment. It's because of this situation and me as a therapist bringing in my own history and my own experiences, will I be the most effective fit for you?
Yeah.
And if not, a different therapist. I'm really passionate about the fact that no matter the background, no matter the person, everyone is deserving of care.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of finding the right therapist and the therapist's awareness of understanding their capacity and being able to treat any individual.
Absolutely. TLDR, person-centered therapy, your therapist puts you in the driver's seat and is there to guide you through the process of figuring out your own life.
With unconditional positive regard.
We love to see it.
So then with that, I think we can move on to existential.
Ooh, this is interesting. Talk to me about existential therapy.
This one's really interesting because it's not necessarily a modality in itself. It comes from philosophy. So if we're really getting into the nitty gritty of it, and I will do this very briefly because I think it's very interesting, but existentialism came from a response to a philosophy called essentialism, which says that you have an innate purpose in your life. Existentialism is more nihilistic in nature, where it kind of just focuses on the here and now, the awareness that you will die at some point, and what you do on this earth while you still have the time is important, and you have full and complete control over it. You have the freedom to do what you want with your time, and the relationships that you create in that time are probably going to be the most significant parts of this life.
And I think it's important also to point out that existential therapy is not so much a modality as it is what you said, a philosophy toward therapy in general. Right. So you can see a lot of therapists who have an existential frame of mind and practice XYZ form of therapy. Have you ever heard that great thing about YOLO?
Wait, tell me more.
If you only live once, then almost by definition, it either means that absolutely nothing matters or absolutely everything matters.
Existentialism says you have the choice to choose.
What's next?
Let's get into the behavioral therapies.
So these are what you might encounter most these days. These are very popular, very evidence-based, contemporary therapy approaches. For example, many people have probably heard of CBT, which stands for?
Cognitive behavioral therapy.
This is very popular, very widespread.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah. So CBT is going to be probably the most common modality that people encounter when they go to therapy. And that's just because it's the most evidence-based, it's the most accessible.
And it's brief. CBT is the philosophy that there's this kind of chain reaction between our thoughts, then our behaviors, then our emotions.
Yes.
So what you think affects what you do, which affects what you feel.
Yes.
And we oftentimes fall into very reflexive, unhelpful, what we might call maladaptive thought patterns. Yes, so the goal through CBT therapy is identifying these negative thought patterns that we hold without even realizing that we hold, and being able to examine them and rewire them.
Yes.
And have more productive thought patterns that will lead us to more productive feelings and behaviors.
Yeah. A
great example that I usually use is, oh, that person didn't respond to my text, right? They're mad at me. Something's wrong. Whoa. That is a reflexive thought pattern.
Yeah.
What do we actually know? So CBT might say, this is a very simple example, but CBT would say, back up, notice that thought pattern. What is the actual reality? What is the fact? The fact is they did not reply to my text. That is all we know. I feel so much better now.
Yeah.
Because I'm not telling myself that story. Oh, it must mean they're mad at me. It must mean they deleted my number. No. Maybe they're in the shower. Maybe their phone's dead. So again, this is a very simple example, but it shows how with CBT, you are identifying these maladaptive patterns. You are bringing them into the open so that you can acknowledge that they are unhelpful to you. Let's start to change them.
Yeah.
And rely on more positive thought patterns.
Yeah. And what I think is really powerful about CBT is that it places the power into your hands. So while it sounds simple, it's not easy to be able to gain that awareness and then to be able to consciously change those thought patterns, but you do have the ability to do it. Everybody has that ability to change those thought patterns.
It does take practice, though. It's not just going to happen magically. It's like the brain is a muscle.
It is.
You have to go to the gym. You have to work out that muscle.
Yeah.
I think about it as like getting my reps in. When every time I catch myself, this isn't just CBT, this is anything mental health wise, and I improve the way I'm thinking about something, or I feel like I'm being productive mental health wise, I'm like, great, that was another rep. That was me practicing, because the more you do it, the better at it you get.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of similar in the CBT world, this is all behavior therapy-ish.
Yes.
What's another common method?
There's also DBT.
Yes.
Which stands for dialectical behavior therapy.
Did you know what dialectical means? Because I didn't.
Do tell.
Dialectics is the study of opposing forces and how things can coexist.
That makes a lot of sense.
So makes sense.
That makes so much sense. So for those of us who don't know, DBT was actually created to treat people with borderline personality disorder. It's used for much more than that now. Borderline personality disorder is characterized by volatile emotions. So if we're talking about dialectical and it's kind of this balance between two things, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yes, because a huge tenet of DBT is emotional regulation. There's a lot of things that are great about DBT. There's distress tolerance, which is how, when I am experiencing those intense negative emotions, how do I move forward productively and being able, even in the short term. It's also, DBT has also been used for people who have suicidal ideation, things like that. So it's how can I safely get through distress? So emotional regulation is huge. Distress tolerance is huge. Mindfulness is big with DBT. And see how we're now getting into this kind of more modern approach to therapy. Mindfulness, which is a great tool, is really about what?
It's about conscious awareness.
Yeah.
So becoming aware of our external and how it interplays with our internal.
Another big DBT pillar is also interpersonal effectiveness, which I think is really great because a lot of times, take for example, borderline personality disorder, it can cause a lot of strain in relationships.
Yes.
So learning how to navigate your emotions in the context of your relationships and how to communicate in an effective and healthy way when you might be going through some of these things, DBT is also very helpful for.
It's also super helpful for grounding as well. So being able to come into that present moment, which is a pillar of mindfulness as well, coming into the here and now. And what I thought was really interesting was how it brings in the physical DBT. So there is a technique where it's more somatic in nature, where you freeze like a water bottle, for example. And during session, the client will hold the water bottle and really ground in that discomfort of holding something so cold, obviously not to the point that it's painful, but enough to where it's noticeable. And you can really ground there, and it will help if you're experiencing any depersonalization or derealization to ground you in the moment, in this space in your body, so that you can really be present.
I love that. That's such a great concrete example of what mindfulness kind of is.
Yeah.
Let's sit right now with this physical sensation without judgment and experience it.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
DBT is really cool.
I love that DBT brings in that science-based woo. So when
have we talked about woo yet?
I don't know if we've talked about woo yet.
One of the first things I ever said to Myolane was, I'm the least woo-woo person you'll ever meet. And she said, I'm a woo-woo, but I'm science-based woo-woo, which I thought was awesome.
So that's where it's bringing in like the grounding and the mindfulness, the meditation, the affirmations. I'm all about it, but it has to be evidence-backed.
And you know what? You saying that actually pulled me in your direction, because now I identify as science-based woo-woo.
Yeah.
Because I don't mind the woo-woo as long as it's, like, no offense to anyone listening, but I don't particularly buy into like astrological signs or anything like that. But if there is a scientific backing, there is, meditation. Mindfulness has a scientific backing.
Yeah.
So science-based woo.
Science-based woo. We're all here for it.
So that was dialectical behavior therapy.
Now we come to
my favorite.
Oh, I was about to say the same thing. Our personal favorite. We have ACT, A-C-T.
ACT, which stands for acceptance, ding, 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 acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT. Mm-hmm. We love this.
We love this so much.
Talk to me about ACT. Do you call it ACT or ACT?
I call it ACT.
I like that.
Yeah. Do you call it ACT?
I call it ACT.
Is there a correct?
I don't know. So this is where we get to tie in what we were talking about earlier, that avoidance conversation that we were having. Mm-hmm. Because ACT is basically, stop doing that. So what does that look like?
So it looks like, first of all, acceptance. So when we're talking about avoidance, you are running away from something. Mm-hmm. You are literally making every attempt to get away from wherever the discomfort is coming from.
Which again, we will point out, is a survival mechanism.
It's a survival mechanism.
So do not get down on yourself for doing that. You are trying to protect yourself. Your mind and your body, it's a protective measure. Yeah.
When it stops being helpful and starts being inhibiting.
Sure.
Yeah. So we're accepting that whatever it is we're going through, whatever the discomfort is a natural part of life, a natural part of experience, and a natural part of being human. Mm-hmm. So let's say, for example, you are going through a season of your life where a lot is coming up for you and you're not exactly where you would like to be at this time. You don't have to be okay with where you're at, but you should accept where you're at. Do you want to go into the difference?
Being okay with it is passive. It means I'm not going to do anything about it. Acceptance doesn't have to be passive. Acceptance is, hey, I am openly acknowledging that this is the reality. I'm not trying to run from that. I'm not trying to deny it to myself. Mm-hmm. I'm accepting it. Therefore, I'm okay with it in the present moment. At the same time, I'm going to work toward what I want to work toward. I'm going to make changes. I'm going to work on myself.
Yeah. This is where I am right now. This is where I want to be. Now that I know where I am, I have full awareness of it. Now I can finally take those steps to live the life worth living.
Yeah. So with ACT, I find an incredible peace almost because it feels so releasing to just a little bit of personal disclosure here. I was, for a while back, I was dealing with some health stuff, and I would wake up and be able to feel if I was going to have a bad day. And what I started working on a lot, because what would happen is I would instantly get down. I'd be frustrated. I'd be sad. Oh, this is going to be another one of those days.
Yeah.
So once I started going that more ACT mentality, I stopped telling myself those stories. If I would wake up and I wouldn't feel well, I would not sit in that frustration, that sadness. Instead, it would be a non-judgmental, just pointing out to myself, oh, I am objectively, I am experiencing these symptoms right now.
Yeah.
That is what that's going to be. And that was so peaceful because I took away its power over me. I took away its ability to ruin my day because instead I just pointed it out to myself objectively, and I was in allowance. I was in flow of it.
Yeah.
My therapist loves to use the word flow.
Flow.
Just being in flow of what is true.
Yeah.
So I find ACT very powerful. I'm also, for you listeners who care so deeply about me, I'm feeling much better. So we're all good.
Yay. I can really relate to that. I used to deal with chronic pain for many years of my life, and it was hard. And waking up and knowing I'm going to have a bad day is debilitating by itself. So I think people are really going to resonate
Absolutely.
with that.
Yeah. I also wanted to touch on a couple other therapeutic interventions that people might encounter because they're very common.
Yeah.
Especially lately, they're becoming more popular. EMDR is on the rise. EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Okay, let's break that down.
Okay. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. EMDR is big for trauma specifically.
Yeah.
It's big for post-traumatic stress disorder.
PTSD.
And it's this really cool new thing that we still don't really know why it works. There's theories, but we're not sure. But it's shown to be incredibly effective so far. It's been around for a few decades, where people will unpack traumatic events in their lives while visually following a back and forth eye pattern. So there'll either be a light on a screen, or, different therapists have different ways of doing it, but you will literally track it with your eyes back and forth.
Yeah.
Some people think that this recreates the process of REM sleep, which is when your mind kind of stores and unpacks memories.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's been shown to be very effective in kind of breaking down trauma and bringing it to the surface and helping an individual's relationship with their trauma in their past.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's kind of hypnotic in a way. It reminds me of hypnosis. I'm kind of thinking like the watch that goes back and forth.
You are getting sleepy.
Yes. I think it's very much similar to that, which is fascinating by itself. But this act of looking from left to right, left to right, left to right, and recalling this memory, it helps you to access that subconscious mind and kind of habituate your mind to that experience.
Habituation. That's huge. What's habituation?
Habituation is when you kind of get used to whatever that thought is. So we experience habituation in our day-to-day lives, whether it be just in our regular routine, things that we experience on the day-to-day.
Imagine you walk out your front door and your friend is waiting there in a scary mask and scares you, and you jump and you scream. They're going to do that every single day, every time you walk out that front door.
Yeah.
By the 10th, 11th, 12th day, it's not going to scare you anymore.
Right.
You're so used to it. It's a normal.
Habituated.
You've been habituated to that stimulus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening with EMDR.
Right.
We're habituating our minds to the memory.
Speaking of habituation, the very last thing I wanted to touch on, which is also very common, is exposure therapy.
Yes.
They kind of share some similar features.
They do.
What is exposure therapy used for?
Exposure therapy is used for people who have specific phobias to help them to overcome those phobias through exposing them to the stimulus that's distressing.
Is it a myth-busting moment?
It is a myth-busting moment.
A lot of people think that exposure therapy is, you're afraid of snakes, I'm going to put you in a room with 1,000 snakes. You're exposed. Boom, go deal with it.
Imagine how awful that would be.
Awful. Exposure therapy is very deliberate. Oftentimes we use what we call an exposure hierarchy, which is developing with your therapist from less intense to more intense, a hierarchy of the way you're going to move through these exposures gradually. So for example, you're phobic of dogs. Okay, at the beginning, we're just going to watch a video of a dog. Next, we're going to imagine what it's like to touch a dog. Next, we're going to go to a park and watch some dogs. Next, we're going to pet a dog. Next, we're going to cuddle with a dog, and it continues growing.
Yes.
So it's very safe. It's very gradual. I mean, there is, between you and me, there's a exposure therapy technique called flooding, which is more of the like throw them into the pit of snakes, and which, has some scientific backing. I think it's a lot less pleasant.
Yeah.
But anyway, exposure therapy can also be very useful for OCD if people have specific triggers that drive their compulsions.
Yeah.
You can start to break down that relationship by exposing them to that stimulus. So exposure therapy can be really, really useful.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, with all that being said,
Yeah, we kind of killed that, Mylena.
Yeah.
That was a lot of good therapy info right there.
That was just like info dumping.
Yes.
Here's all the info.
Yes.
With all that in mind, how do we find the right therapist for us?
That is such a good question. I think it starts with, what are you coming into therapy for?
Absolutely.
Are you coming in because your fear of airplanes means you can't travel? You might want some exposure therapy. Are you coming in because you've recently uncovered some childhood trauma and it's really holding you back? You might want something a little more psychoanalytical.
Yeah. Trauma-focused.
Trauma-focused. So I think the first step is, what are you coming into therapy for?
Yeah.
So let's say I've identified that. I know why I'm coming in.
Right.
What's my next step?
So now it's the time to find your therapist. And there are a couple different ways that you can go about this. I think most commonly people try to go through their insurance because therapy can be expensive. So if you're going through your insurance, you can contact them and they can give you a list of local therapists that you can contact, see if they have any availability. There's also Psychology Today. So it's a website that you can go to and you'll see a list of therapists, and oftentimes they'll list which insurances they take and what their availability is.
I love Psychology Today.
Yeah.
It's a great first stop because it has so many great filters. You can put in your location, your insurance, what you're coming in for.
Yeah.
Are you interested in a male or female therapist? So many different things. And it will spit out so many different options that fit your needs.
Yes.
And you can check, do they take my insurance?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And they all have cute little headshots and like little
Yeah.
blurbs about themselves. It's
Have
very...
you seen they even started putting videos of
Oh, I
themselves?
love that.
I love it too. I'm
That's
like,
great.
oh, I can see exactly what you're like. It's nice. And
That's
you can, they have the little blurb. So while therapists might not give you a whole lot of information about their personal lives, you can still see like, is this somebody that I'm going to vibe with?
Yeah.
You can also go outside of insurance. So there are a couple places you can go. You can just find somebody who has their own private practice or works within an agency, and you can just pay out of pocket for that. What a lot of people also do is they will request a super bill, which your therapist can give you, and you can submit that to your insurance company, and your insurance company may or may not give you a reimbursement. It's usually a small percentage of what the cost of therapy was for you.
Sure.
But it's better than nothing.
Absolutely.
There's also a sliding scale. So if you are having trouble finding a therapist that works within your budget, you can ask whatever therapist you are interested in if they offer a sliding scale, which means that based on your income, they will offer a higher or lower rate.
Yeah, they'll adjust for your needs.
Exactly. They'll adjust for your needs.
Many, many therapists offer that.
Yeah. Most do.
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah.
There's also community resources, and these are probably the most affordable. They are quite impacted, though, just a note, but you can look online, find your local community resources for therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of different avenues. And sometimes, especially with the insurance element of it, finding a therapist that matches what you're looking for in your area, covered by your insurance, sometimes it can take a while to kind of weed through the options to find a good option.
Yeah.
Be prepared. That might be a little intimidating, but do not give up. It'll maybe take a day or two on some of these websites. You will find a good fit.
Something that I think is also worth noting is the letters on the backs of all of the names. So there's LMFT,
Which is licensed marriage and family therapist.
which is what we're going to be. There's also LCSW.
Licensed clinical social worker.
Yes. And so social workers can conduct therapy. They also connect you with local resources.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're amazing as well.
Absolutely. There's also LPCC, which is a licensed professional clinical counselor. So different types of licenses and degrees might offer slightly different services. Let's talk about now the dating process.
Yes.
Once you start with a therapist, talk to me about the therapeutic relationship and the therapeutic alliance.
Yeah. First of all, I want to touch on how when you first meet a therapist, it's usually through consultation over the phone. So it's usually like a short, maybe 10-minute conversation between you and the therapist to see, do I like this person? Are they offering services that I need? So that is a really great way for you to just get a little bit of a taste and intro into what that therapeutic alliance is going to look like. And a therapeutic alliance is the rapport, the trust, the relationship between the client and the clinician that really drives the therapeutic process. It's probably the most important part of therapy.
One of the first things we learned in our program is that regardless of therapeutic orientation, training, technique, the biggest indicator of the success of therapy is the therapeutic relationship.
Yes.
It is vitally important. I love what they told us in the very beginning. They said, you can be the most brilliant technician in the world. You can have every technique in the book in your toolbox as a therapist, but unless you have that interpersonal ability to really form that connection with a client, it's not going to be effective treatment.
No, it's not.
So why we're saying that is from the client end, make sure you feel that.
Yeah. When you walk into that therapy room, like I think I said in the last episode, therapy can be a little weird. When you first walk into that room, it can be uncomfortable, but your therapist should be a warm, safe, inviting person that you can trust and feel comfortable disclosing vulnerable information about yourself with. And that doesn't necessarily come first session, but you should feel some kind of connection to your therapist.
That's great. I'm so glad you said that because I don't want to get too carried away and too enthusiastic. You're right. You're not going to walk in on the very first session and feel like you're ready to sit down and tell them absolutely everything and feel fixed. That's just not how it works. But there should be a sense of safety and a sense of, I can tell that I will work well with this person. Even if I'm not feeling ready right in this first session, I feel like there is that potential.
I feel that one of the most important characteristics a good therapist has, especially when it comes to creating that relationship, is warmth. Just being, how would you describe warmth?
it's hard to put your finger on. It's that sense of comfort, that sense of non-judgment, you know?
Yeah.
How do you plan to navigate that, given that you are such an unpleasant person, Mylan?
It's going to be really challenging for me, I think.
How do you plan to treat clients when you are just mean? Just kidding.
For me, in one of my classes, in my group therapy class, we had to give first impressions of each other. And I was really, really greatly honored when my biggest strength was warmth, and that someone described it as a warmth you can't teach. And it was just so reassuring to me that I was on the right path, that this was really what I was meant to be
That's
doing.
really sweet. I agree. Absolutely.
Thank you.
It's an interesting career path in that you have to have the part that you're taught, the part you can learn, but you also have to come into it to some extent with that unteachable
quality.
The special sauce.
The X factor.
The it factor. We have the it factor, everyone. So pay attention to that, and why we call it the dating process is that it is very common that you try around. You try several different therapists before you find the right fit.
Yeah.
And by try around, we mean you might have one session with this person and 2 sessions with this person before you realize, I'm not feeling it. That is totally okay.
Yeah. And it's also okay to tell your therapist why maybe it's not working.
Yes.
You could definitely sit down with your therapist and say, this isn't really working for me. Can we explore why? Or maybe you've identified why and you can tell them directly.
Yeah.
And then they could say either, okay, I can change that and we can move forward, or that's really pivotal to my approach here. So maybe I can refer you to somebody else.
Absolutely. You will not offend your therapist.
No. They're only there to help you.
They are there to help you. I feel it's totally natural, but we always want to be the favorite client and, have the therapist like us, and they are there to help you. And if you say something even as forward as, hey, I don't think this is the right fit, heard it before, completely part of the process.
Yep.
Oh.
That was a lot.
That was a lot of information.
But it's good.
Yeah. Do you think we overwhelmed people?
Maybe a little bit, but that's okay. Par for the course.
Yeah, it's part of it. TLDR, different styles of therapy. Here's how to go about finding a therapist. This is what you should look for in a relationship.
Yep.
Yeah. How you feeling, episode 2?
I'm feeling good. How are you feeling?
Yeah, it's fun. I'm really enjoying this. And I feel like it really helps me kind of solidify what we're learning.
Yeah.
Speaking it out loud,
And I'm learning what I don't know as well.
Totally. Because we know what we know, and we also know what we don't know.
Yeah.
And we want to find it out.
Yep.
Yeah. So now, next week, we are going to talk about
attachment styles.
Yes, we gave you a false advertisement last time, but this time it's really happening. So tune in next time. We'll talk all about attachment styles, how they affect romantic relationships, platonic relationships, all sorts of different things.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Until next time.
I'm Mylene.
I'm Michael.
Thank you for coming to class with us.
Yes, this has been Therapy in Progress.
Thank you for joining us.
Bye.
Therapy in Progress is produced for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to substitute for professional medical or mental health care.
Views expressed here are our own. If you're in need of support, we encourage you to reach out to a licensed professional.
Your mental health matters. Talk to you next time.